Hello, welcome to From Tweets to Toots, a beginner's guide to Mastodon. This is training I originally delivered for University of Strathclyde Andersonian Libraries Training Week in January 2023 with some updates in April 2023. So we're going to start with some context about why are we talking about Mastodon. We'll have a look at what is Mastodon. We'll look at how do I join Mastodon, how do I use Mastodon, and we'll look at some reasons why we might want to use Mastodon and reasons why we might not. So for some context, Elon Musk purchased Twitter in 2022. This is the underlying reason why we're looking at needing to potentially move away from Twitter. Mastodon itself has been around since 2016, so it's not a brand new service. It's always been a relatively small service though, so it had 1 million users by late 2017 compared to 330 million for Twitter at that point. And generally those people that have joined Mastodon in the early years, they join for specific reasons like being unhappy with Twitter's moderation policies or with the general culture on Twitter. And in April 2022, Elon Musk announced his plan to buy Twitter, and this created a wave of registrations on Mastodon. So for the first time, we were seeing larger numbers registering for accounts there. And then this graph shows the number of accounts that were being registered daily. So we can see it started at a very low baseline until around about the end of October, the purchase was completed of Twitter, and we get this first spike up to about 50,000 accounts being registered a day. Then there was a large layoff of staff, and this led to an even larger spike. And then came Musk's ultimatum where he said that all remaining staff must work hardcore, and that led to an even bigger spike. And also what's interesting is that the leveling off after these spikes is kind of rising each time as well. So since then, there have also been further waves of more new users signing up. These waves tend to occur whenever there's any major problems or policy changes happening at Twitter. So for example, when Twitter tried to ban all links back to Mastodon and banned the Join Mastodon Twitter account, and when Elon Musk threatened to sue the owner of the Twitter and then Mastodon account that was publishing the locations of where his private jet was taking off and landing. And this is an example of how this was kind of being looked at on Mastodon itself. So a culture was developing on Mastodon of not taking the Twitter situation entirely seriously. More recently, from April 2023, Mastodon's total account registrations have now passed 11 million, so it is growing significantly. However, the number of active users at one time has fallen back, so it peaked around 2.6 million and has since fallen back to around 1.2 million. The people who are staying around tend to be a more passionate core base, interested in the kind of open source nature of the network. And continued users do tend to be tech savvy. There is an ongoing perception that Mastodon is harder to use, but we'll come to that later on and explain why some of that is. But there's still a far wider variety of users now than there had been prior to that initial spike back in 2022. One very noticeable thing is that Mastodon failed to attract any sort of companies or marketers. Now, many users will see that as a good thing, but it does mean that people have to maintain Twitter accounts when they want to interact with these companies to ask a question or submit feedback. And whole communities failed to move. So even if some of the people you want to follow came over to Mastodon, if you were still following people on Twitter, then you would tend to keep a Twitter account as well. And these people tended to just go back to using Twitter entirely and left Mastodon. So these are some news headlines about Twitter from this useful website, twitterisgoinggreat.com. We can see at the top left essentially our kind of moderation issues where the material on Twitter is no longer being moderated due to the lack of staff. The top right shows that Twitter has ongoing legal issues, especially with not paying staff redundancies and paying rent. The bottom left shows there have been an increase in technical issues at Twitter, with the service often going down. and that bottom right group shows headlines about staff who are continuing to leave the company. And this is from April 2023, just some further headlines to show that generally these problems are still ongoing. So what does the future at Twitter look like? About 8% of Twitter users had stopped using the platform by January. And a further 9% drop had been forecast by 2024. That doesn't sound like a great deal, but especially for us at the university, it was very much a big deal because most of those leaving are under 25, so the age of students. And content could disappear without paying for Twitter Blue. So Twitter has launched this subscription model and now emphasizes any content being posted from accounts that pay this. And technical and content issues are expected to continue and to increase. So, where are users moving to instead of Twitter? Well, Facebook still exists. It is still the world's largest social media platform. However, it is widely seen as kind of an old-fashioned platform now, and by and large, we had already stopped using it in the library. Instagram and TikTok are very popular platforms now, and we do use Instagram, although we don't use TikTok because we haven't yet considered how we might want to use that kind of video platform. Tumblr is making something of a comeback, but we'll talk about this more later on because interestingly they may be joining the sort of network that Mastodon is within as well, and they'll be able to interact with each other. Co-host was looking popular at the time of that initial spike in Mastodon registrations. However, it does seem to have stopped now and is no longer growing very rapidly. Blue Sky is a very recent addition. So this is from Jack Dorsey, who was the previous owner of Twitter. He is launching a new platform. We know very little about it yet, really, especially in terms of how is it going to be funded going forward. Will it just be another Twitter, or are they going to do something different? It's too early to say at the moment. Counter Social, Gab, and Truth Social are all examples of communities kind of created for specific political platforms. I wouldn't really recommend using any of these, but one reason why I mention them is that they are all, in fact, just rebranded versions of Mastodon. So what actually is Mastodon? Well, in technical terms, it uses an open source protocol called ActivityPub. And there's a Mastodon company, which is a non-profit based in Germany, that maintains the code for Mastodon itself. Now, as part of the Fediverse, this is all different platforms that use that ActivityPub protocol. PixelFed is an Instagram-like network. PeerTube is like YouTube. But what's interesting about the Fediverse is that all of these can connect together, and it's going to soon include Tumblr as well. So as I was saying earlier, this means, for example, that if I have a Mastodon account and you're on Tumblr, we can follow each other. It doesn't always display quite the best way because it's having to work between different platforms, but you'll generally get the text and images of posts, and that way you only have to maintain one social network now. You don't have to have accounts across multiple platforms. And Mastodon itself is made up of many instances or servers. So if you go to Mastodon's homepage here at joinmastodon.org, you won't actually see the actual network because it is made up of these instances. So there is no central website like you have for Twitter or Facebook. Instead, if you go to this website, it will give you a list of available instances you could potentially join, although it does not list all of them. So, instances. These are the individual servers or websites that are running Mastodon. You only need to join one. There's no reason to have an account for more than one instance. But you may get a better experience if you choose an instance that is more relevant to you. Now by that, there are large general instances like mastodon.social, which is the largest. But there are also interest-based instances, such as veganism.social. Profession-based instances such as mastodon.acm.org, regional instances such as mastodon.scot or glasgow.social, and you can also just self-host your own instance if you want complete control over your own data. Now, these instances are mostly run by volunteers. There's no ads or data tracking on Mastodon, so these server costs tend to be paid mostly by donations. And instances can be closed to registration, so especially during those big spikes in new users signing up, a lot of the larger servers tended to close registrations just because they were at capacity. Instances could possibly close down, however, there is a system of rules in place called the Mastodon Server Covenant, which basically says that if a server operator is going to close their server down, they should give all their users a certain period of warning, and you can just move your account over to another instance. Moving to another instance is relatively straightforward. You do have to essentially register on the instance you want to move to, and then through the settings you can link back to your old account. It carries over all of the people you are being followed by, however it does not carry forward any of the content. That will stay on the old instance. You also need to manually download a list of who you are following yourself, but you can just download that file and then re-upload it on your new instance to keep all the people you're following. Now this graph shows where we're at with the number of users on Mastodon, so you can see it when it went past 11 million there in April, and underneath is showing the number of active instances. So there's about 4,500 instances, although many of these will be small kind of personal or small group instances. So if we want to host an instance, hosting providers are available, so you can just pay a sum of money. A small instance for a kind of single user is available for about $6 a month. You can also just run all the software on your own hardware, though it will require some technical knowledge. And hosting an instance is recommended for organizations because it is a way to kind of verify who you are within this account. It's also something that possibly libraries could perform in the future. So when we look at the kind of current model where it's being run by volunteers, it's maybe not the most sustainable way to keep the network going, but public libraries would be ideally situated to be a trusted organization that hosts services for public goods that might be ideal hosts of Mastodon instances. So we've chosen an instance and we've registered an account. So you need to log in online at your instance. So for example, my account is on glasgow.social. So if I want to access Mastodon through a web browser, I would just go to glasgow.social. There's also many apps available for Android and Apple. There are official Mastodon apps, which are perfectly fine, but there's also a wide variety of other apps available, and some of these are very good. I personally use Tusky on Android. But if we're using the online version, this is kind of what it will look like once we have logged in. And you can see that the homepage does look very similar to Twitter in a number of ways. So, how do we toot, which is the Mastodon equivalent of how to tweet? Well, by default, we can toot up to 500 characters, but this actually can be changed by the instance admin, so on some instances they may allow more. You can attach photos or videos. However, especially on small instances, be aware that, like I say, the costs are being met by volunteers, and hosting large files can lead to a lot of storage costs. So if you're going to attach videos, you may want to use a different platform. Now, of course, you can upload to YouTube and then just link it from your Mastodon account, or there is PeerTube, which is the Fediverse's video hosting equivalent, and that kind of gets around the storage issues by sharing the storage needs amongst users. You can put alt text on images, and indeed you definitely should. It's a great accessibility tool for those who are using a screen reader or is otherwise unable to look at what is the content of an image. You can add polls, so those buttons along the bottom of the Toot box there, that second one is to add a poll, and that just works basically the same way as Twitter polls did. You can choose a question, some possible answers, and set a time period you want it to run. Now, post privacy is set on an individual post basis. What this means is I can say that I want this toot to be visible to anyone, or I want this toot to be visible to only people who are following me. Or I can make Toots only visible to the person I'm replying to. So be aware of that for replies. If you're replying to someone and only want that person to see it, it's that button that looks like a little planet there to change the post privacy. Now, content wrappers, that CW button there, these work by basically putting up a warning label on a post. So say, for example, I'm going to post something that is about politics. I could put a content wrapper that says politics. Now, it's up to the users to decide how they want to interact with content wrappers, but if they see a post that says politics, and they may just choose not to expand it. Or if you want to, you can just automatically have them all expanded. And you can specify a language for visibility, so that EN there is just for English, and you can specify what language you're posting in, and then people can say which languages they want to see appear in their timeline. So alt text on images. When you upload an image, you'll see this box here. Basically, alt text is designed to make posts make sense to people who are unable to see the images. So it should describe the content of what is inside the photograph. So here I might say it's a photograph of some fish and chips. The Mastodon has a culture of promoting accessibility, so it is really important to add this alt text, and indeed if you make a habit of not doing it, you may find some users may start replying suggesting it would be a good idea to add it. And in the screen you also have manual control for the thumbnail focus point. So that circle you can see, if the image is being shrunk down for display, it will focus around that point. You can choose what is the most important point of the image. So a closer look at content wrappers. So you can see here I've made test Toot the tag, and basically if the content wrapper is closed, you just see that and no more. But you click on show more and you see the full content of the Toot. So it's hiding that content away. And it's recommended for any sensitive content. The general rule I would apply is if you wouldn't say it to a stranger in public, it should probably be behind a tag. And if you don't really want to use the service yourself, you can go into your settings and just tell it to automatically open all content wrappers. So once you are on Mastodon, it's important to make an introduction post. This is a bit of a tradition, and it's a way that a lot of people are going to find your account to follow. So send an initial toot with a brief description about yourself. And it's important to include lots of hashtags in that post so that you can be found. And the reason for this is that Mastodon has no text search. So say, for example, if I say that I work in a library, people searching for library are not going to see that post. But if I use hashtag library, people will be able to find the post using that hashtag. So it's about giving the users control over what content in their posts can be found in the search. So this is what the search window in Mastodon looks like. I'm searching here for Strathclyde, and you can see there are some accounts for Strathclyde and some hashtags, but there is no general text search results. So you can search for users by name or by their username. You can search for hashtags. Now you can search for text locally if this has been enabled on your instance, but generally most instances I've seen have not enabled this. And there are also some trending posts and hashtags down at the bottom right there. So if we want to follow an account that's on another instance, this is where Mastodon starts to be a little more complex than Twitter, as I was saying earlier. It's entirely possible though, but what you have to be aware of is that when you're following someone on another instance, you have to make sure you're doing it on your instance. So if you're on the website, make sure you're logged in on your instance. So I would be at glasgow.social. Now you can search for the user from your instance just by putting in their name or username, and you'll be fine to follow it from there. Now, if they're on another instance, you can search for them using their full username. So every Mastodon account will have a shortened username, which in my case is just @ChristopherKeen, and you can use that to find me on glasgow.social. But if you want to find me from somewhere else on any other instance, you can search for @ChristopherKeen @glasgow.social, and that will get you through to my account no matter where you are. And mobile apps work around this. You can generally find users and follow them a little more simply if you're using a mobile app rather than the website. But that picture on the right will show you what happens. So if I have clicked through to look at the University of Strathclyde Mastodon account. They are not on Glasgow.social, so if I try to follow them while on their page, it's going to flag up this picture saying, oh, are you actually trying to follow them on this server or somewhere else? So if I had an account on that instance, I could sign in there and follow them. That would be fine. But because I'm not on that instance, I just need to copy that URL from the bottom right and then search for that on my instance, and I'll be able to follow them that way. And also you can follow hashtags, so this is very useful because it is a little harder to find content on Mastodon without the text search. But let's say I'm interested in anything being posted about Strathclyde, well, I followed the hashtag Strathclyde, and that will just then make any content with that hashtag appear in my timeline the same way as if I was following someone. So yes, you can also follow hashtags. Just once you've searched for the hashtag, it's that little follow icon on the top right. That will let you follow that, and then any posts with those hashtags are going to appear in your timeline. So looking down these options on the right-hand menu now, we've first of all got what's called the local timeline. And this is all Toots on your local instance. So in my case, it's going to show everything that's posted on Glasgow.social. This is more useful on smaller instances. The very large generalized instances, there's of course going to be far too many Toots to go through. This is why joining a relevant instance can be kind of better than a large general one. Because here, for example, if on Glasgow.social most users are from the Glasgow area, that means that's what I'm going to see in the local timeline. So next is the Federated timeline. This shows all Toots from every instance someone on your instance follows. So it's useful in very small instances where maybe the local timeline has very little happening on it, but otherwise you're going to end up seeing pretty much every Toot from the entire of Mastodon, which is going to be far too much to look at. But it can be useful just to see some general messages. So Mastodon does have a direct messages service. It's available, but it's not encrypted. And in fact, you will see that warning appears on the top of the screen saying that they're not end-to-end encrypted when you send a direct message. Mastodon advises you not to share sensitive information on direct messages for this reason. And instance admins do have access to direct messages for moderation purposes, just as Twitter admins would of Twitter direct messages. And basically, you're probably better using a dedicated messaging service for this kind of purpose. Some other useful settings now. So you can filter posts by keywords. So say, for example, you do not want to see any content about a particular topic, even if it's not being put into content wrappers by someone else, you can tell Mastodon to put any Toot containing that word into a content wrapper or just not display it entirely. There is also an advanced web interface, which looks a lot like TweetDeck if you ever used that for Twitter. There's some good follower management tools. I'm going to show these in a moment. There's automated post deletion built in. So this is what the advanced web interface looks like. And yeah, if you have used TweetDeck, you'll see this is very similar. It's good for managing multiple accounts, and it just kind of breaks everything down into columns. This is the follows and followers management tool. Now, Twitter had a lot of third-party tools that would do this, but it's just built into Mastodon. And basically, this allows me to do things like see who I'm following who isn't following back, or see who I'm following who hasn't posted anything in a long time. And automated post deletion, again, this was something that was available via third-party tools on Twitter, but it's just here now in Mastodon. It's always quite good cybersecurity advice to get rid of your posts after a certain time so they aren't just online forever. So I've got it set up here to delete posts that are more than a month old. However, you can tell it to keep certain posts, so posts that get a lot of favorites or boosts, you can tell it to avoid deletion. So you can sort of keep an archive of your best posts. So, why should I use Mastodon? Well, it's about providing a Twitter-like service without being Twitter. And it is the largest close alternative service now. We will wait and see what happens with Blue Sky, but at the moment there's really no other kind of major competing alternatives to Twitter. It has an ad-free and algorithm-free experience. Now, this does mean it relies on those donations and volunteers to run, but it is great to just see the people I'm following and not have a timeline that's full of ads or full of posts an algorithm is trying to just show me. It downplays metrics on posts. So, I mean, I think particularly Twitter has recently gone to even including like a view count on tweets, and it all becomes very competitive. Mastodon is very much downplaying that and just trying to emphasize building, a communication with other users. And it does have a high engagement rate. So this is largely just in my own experience, but although I only have about a tenth of the followers on Mastodon now that I had on Twitter, I find that I already get more engagements with my posts. I think this is partly because there is no algorithm, so certain messages aren't being chosen to be shown more. Also because there are fewer users, so even if you have fewer followers, they're kind of got less to look at. So the engagement is very good, and I get a lot of kind of replies to my post, which is what you want when you're in a social network. And there is a high focus on accessibility, so things like the alt text is a very good thing to push, and Mastodon is very keen on keeping that in the foreground. As a strong moderation ethos, though, basically every instance can decide how it's going to moderate its users. The way it works around different instances having trouble with each other's policies is instance can effectively block an entire other instance, and like Glasgow.social has blocked some, including like those ones I mentioned earlier that were kind of political platforms based on Mastodon, such as Truth Social. So an instance admin can basically just decide, no, we don't want to interact with this other instance because their moderation ethos is just incompatible with ours. And the Fediverse is likely to continue to grow. So if we get on Mastodon now, we have an account that can be followed by anyone using any of the applications built on that ActivityPub protocol, or the likes of Tumblr that are looking at joining it. And more people joining helps sustain the service as well. So if we want to support something like this, the way to support it is to be there and use it. And why might the university want to join, or an organisation in general? Well, it's insurance against further technical issues or content issues at Twitter, the sort of potential embarrassment of being related to that if we continue to rely on Twitter for communications. Users on Mastodon are likely to be in a key student demographic, so a lot of users are under 25. It's to avoid paying that premium Twitter membership to be seen. So, I mean, Twitter is looking to charge up to $1,000 a month for organizations to get verified. And that way, again, we can be followed from across the Fediverse. So people who have Tumblr accounts or PixelFed accounts, they would be able to follow our presence on Mastodon. And users, I think, generally do want to see more organizations join. So while marketing is maybe not something people want to see, people do want to be able to communicate with companies to ask questions or get feedback. And I myself have had to keep a Twitter account just to be able to message the likes of ScotRail and other organizations. So it'd be great if these organizations were actually there on Mastodon instead. Also, a social impact of encouraging students or generally our users to change, because Mastodon does have that kind of better environment. It has a better kind of, it lacks the algorithms, it lacks the adverts. We want to encourage our users to go to that kind of platform, I think. And we also have the option to host a Strathclyde instance, and that would give us full control over our data that we're putting on the social media. But what are the downsides of Mastodon? Well, it's not Twitter, and people looking for Twitter are still likely to just be on Twitter. There is an element of culture shock when first joining from Twitter, so people can be surprised when a random person responds to your post telling you, oh, you forgot to add alt text to that image. I would just say be aware that it's a learning process and you'll get used to it soon. The user base is still much smaller than Twitter, but growing slowly. And there's a few other large organizations on there yet. The general experience I've had of trying to convince our organization to join is it's still a case of, oh, we want to wait and see. Nobody wants to go first, but the trouble there is then nobody goes. And there are additional costs and technical knowledge required to host your own instance. So what am I asking to take away from this talk? Well, please do go to Mastodon, give it a try. If you're unsure which instance you want to join, try mastodon.acm.org, that is a instance for computing professionals, or glasgow.social, which is a regional instance for Glasgow, but these are open to anyone. You can always change instance later anyway. Install the official Mastodon app or try a third-party app. Like I say, these do simplify some of the complex parts of different instances. Follow some friends, follow some hashtags, follow the Strathclyde accounts because we need to try and encourage those to get used more. And be aware of that different ethos to Twitter. And if people call you out on it, don't take offence, just be aware they're trying to help you get on board as well. And ultimately, I want you to think about social networks. They're more about the community than the technology. So I don't think we're on Twitter because there's anything particularly great about Twitter. People tend to use Twitter because of the people who are on there. And if we want to make Mastodon a good Twitter replacement, it's about getting the people to come over. Thank you very much for watching this talk. And if you have any further questions, please do send them to me on Mastodon. I'm always happy to help you get settled in once you've registered for an account there. Thank you.